Right now, if you look at the headlines, you might think the American economy is invincible. The S&P 500 is breaking records. Unemployment numbers are reportedly low, and politicians from both sides are telling you that the soft landing has been achieved. But there is a different reality growing beneath the surface. It is a reality that doesn't show up on the nightly news until it is too late. If you look away from Wall Street and focus your attention on the balance sheets of specific U.S. states, you will see a very different color: red, deep, structural, and potentially unrecoverable red. We are not talking about a standard cyclical recession here. We are talking about a phenomenon known as silent insolvency. This is what happens when a state government doesn't technically declare bankruptcy, because, legally, states cannot easily go bankrupt in the same way a corporation can. Instead, they enter a death spiral. They cut essential services like police, fire, and education to the bone. They raise property and sales taxes to punishing levels. And they ignore crumbling infrastructure until bridges literally fall into rivers. The state becomes unlivable, not because of a war, but because of math. And the data suggests that this crisis is converging on one specific year. Why 2026? Why is that the year the music stops? Because 2026 is the year the fiscal cliff goes from a theory to a reality. First, billions of dollars in federal pandemic aid the cash injection that has artificially propped up state budgets since 2020 expires completely. Second, a massive wave of state municipal bonds is set to mature. These states will have to refinance their debt not at the near-zero interest rates of the past decade, but at rates that are double or triple what they used to be. Third, we are facing a catastrophic insurance crisis that is effectively making property ownership impossible in high-risk areas. When you combine these three factors, you get a perfect storm. I have spent weeks analyzing the data. I have looked at the dependency scores from federal reports. I have examined the unfunded liability ratios for state pensions. And I have stress-tested the economic diversity of all 50 states. The result is a list of 10 states that are standing on the absolute edge of this cliff. These states all share one fatal, structural flaw. They have what engineers call a single point of failure economy. They do not have diverse industries to protect them. They rely on one single pillar to keep the lights on. Maybe it is tourism. Maybe it is the price of a barrel of oil. Maybe it is a direct IV drip of cash from Washington, D.C. But when that one pillar shakes in 2026, the entire state structure collapses. You might think your state is safe because the weather is nice or the taxes are low, but you need to look closer. You might be living in a financial trap and not even know it until the bill comes due. Today, we are counting down the 10 states most likely to break first when the economy turns. This is not fear-mongering. This is not political rhetoric. This is cold, hard mathematics. Let's look at the numbers. Number 10. South Dakota. The $815 billion bubble. We begin our countdown with a state that often flies under the radar. South Dakota. It is known for Mount Rushmore, wide open spaces, and a sense of rugged, Midwestern freedom. On the surface, South Dakota looks like a fortress of fiscal stability. It has very low unemployment. It has no state income tax. And its government prides itself on a balanced budget. But if you dig a little deeper, you find an economy that has effectively addicted itself to a very specific and very risky industry: the trust industry. Over the last few decades, South Dakota has aggressively deregulated its banking laws. The goal was to attract the wealth of the global elite, and it worked better than anyone could have imagined. Did you know that this quiet, agricultural state currently holds over $815 billion in trust assets? That number is staggering. To put it in perspective, that is significantly more than the GDP of countries like Saudi Arabia or Switzerland. South Dakota has become the Switzerland of America. It allows billionaires from around the world to park their money there forever. Tax-free, shielded from creditors, shielded from ex-spouses, and shielded from the tax authorities of their home countries. It sounds like a brilliant business move for the state until you realize the massive systemic risk it creates. The state's economy is now disproportionately leveraged on this financial services sector. Here is the problem for 2026. The spotlight is turning on. Global regulators and the U.S. federal government are closing in on these loopholes. There is growing bipartisan pressure in Washington to crack down on South Dakota as a domestic tax haven. The Corporate Transparency Act is just the beginning. If legislation passes in 2025 or 2026, that pierces the veil of these trusts. Or if global interest rate shifts make other asset classes more attractive than these stagnant trust accounts, that $815 billion river of money could dry up almost overnight. Capital is mobile. It can move from Sioux Falls to the Cayman Islands in a nanosecond, and if that industry contracts, what is left behind? An agricultural sector that is currently being crushed. Farmers are facing record-high costs for fertilizer, diesel, and equipment. Climate patterns are making yields unpredictable. Remember, South Dakota does not have a state income tax to fall back on. The state government relies heavily on sales tax and the velocity of money moving through its system. When the high-paid trust lawyers, the bankers, and the financial service support staff stop spending, the state budget develops a massive, unfillable hole. South Dakota is like a very small boat carrying a very heavy, very unstable cargo. If the regulatory waters get rough in 2026, that boat capsizes faster than anyone expects. Number 9. Nevada. The 37% gamble. Nevada is the ultimate example of a good times economy. It is a state built entirely on optimism and excess. When America feels rich, Nevada booms like nowhere else. Construction cranes fill the sky, and the champagne flows. But when America feels poor, Nevada busts. And the bust is usually twice as painful and lasts twice as long as the national average. Let's look at the data from the Nevada Resort Association. Tourism accounts for roughly 37% of the state's total GDP. Think about the implications of that number. Nearly 40 cents of every single dollar generated in the entire state comes from one specific human behavior: people deciding to take a vacation. In economic terms, we call this discretionary spending. It is the very first thing families cut when inflation bites. It is the first thing corporations cut when their earnings miss projections. And 2026 is looking like the year the American consumer finally taps out. Credit card debt is currently at record highs. Personal savings rates are at record lows. The average American family has burned through their pandemic savings buffer. When the recession of 2026 hits, the Las Vegas Strip goes dark. Conventions get cancelled. Bachelor parties get cancelled. Family vacations get downgraded to a staycation. But the problem in Nevada isn't just the casinos. It is the housing market that relies on those casino workers. During the pandemic, Californians flooded into Nevada. They drove home prices up by 40% to 50% in a very short period. Now, those home values are teetering on the edge of a correction. Unemployment in Las Vegas is already creeping up, often masking the real numbers behind gig work. When the hotels start laying off staff in 2026 because bookings are down, those service workers, the maids, the dealers, the valet drivers, they cannot pay their mortgages. We saw this exact movie in 2008. Nevada led the nation in foreclosures and bankruptcies. The sequel in 2026 could be even worse because the baseline cost of living has exploded. Nevada has no state income tax buffer to smooth out the revenue ride. It needs you to gamble. It needs you to drink. It needs you to stay in hotel rooms. If you stay home in 2026, Nevada's state services simply cease to function. Number 8. Mississippi. The federal IV drip. Mississippi represents a tragedy of economic potential. It is consistently ranked as the poorest state in the union. But poverty alone is not why it makes this list for a 2026 collapse. It makes the list because of its terrifying dependency on Washington, D.C. Let's look at the dependency score. According to the Legislative Budget Office and recent fiscal analysis, over 41% of Mississippi's total state budget comes directly from federal funds. I want you to really think about that percentage. Almost half of the money the state government spends does not come from its own economy. It does not come from local businesses. It comes from taxpayers in California, New York, and Texas, redistributed via Washington. Mississippi is effectively a hostage economy. It is holding its own citizens hostage, waiting for federal ransom payments to keep the lights on. Here is the risk factor for 2026. The U.S. national debt is exploding past sustainable levels. Washington is eventually going to be forced into austerity measures. It is inevitable. When the federal government starts tightening its belt in 2025 and 2026, they aren't going to cut the military first. They are going to cut discretionary grants. They are going to cut infrastructure aid. They are going to tighten the requirements for Medicaid matching funds. For a wealthy state like California, federal cuts are a headache. For Mississippi, federal cuts are a death sentence. We are already seeing the physical infrastructure of the state crumble before our eyes. Look at the water crisis in Jackson, the state capital. Residents went weeks without safe drinking water. That is a preview of what happens when the federal money tap slows down. Roads go unpaved and turn to gravel. Hospitals in rural areas close down because they depend entirely on Medicaid reimbursements to pay their doctors. If you live in Mississippi, you are not relying on the strength of your local economy. You are relying on the generosity of a federal government that is essentially broke itself. That is a very, very dangerous place to be in 2026. Number 7. Alaska. The price tag trap. Alaska is a unique case study in economic management. It is the only state where the government pays you to live there. The Permanent Fund Dividend, or PFD, is a check every resident gets each year from oil revenues. It sounds like a socialist utopia funded by capitalism, but that check is becoming a trap. Alaska's entire economy is a leveraged bet on the global price of crude oil. Here is the math problem that nobody in Juneau wants to talk about. To balance its state budget, Alaska needs oil to trade at roughly $78 to $80 per barrel. But as of late 2024, and looking at forecasts for 2025 and 2026, oil is often hovering around $74 or dipping lower due to global demand shifts and the rise of renewables. Even though new projects like Willow are coming online to boost production volume, it doesn't matter how much oil you pump if the price per barrel doesn't cover your operating budget. Alaska has no state sales tax. It has no state income tax. It has zero other ways to generate meaningful revenue from its population. So, what happens in 2026 if a global recession drives oil prices down to $60 a barrel? The state savings accounts, which have buffered them in the past, are already drained. The legislature will face a brutal, politically suicidal choice. Option A. Implement a massive state income tax for the first time in history. This would likely cause a revolt and accelerate the exodus of residents. Option B. End the PFD checks. This would immediately cause a local recession because many families rely on that money for basic survival. Option C. Cut education and infrastructure in a state where logistics are already a nightmare. Alaska is beautiful. It is wild. But economically, it is a one-legged stool, and the ground beneath that stool is melting just like the permafrost. Number 6. New Mexico. The federal addiction. If Mississippi is on life support, New Mexico is the patient who refuses to get out of the hospital bed. In many economic rankings, New Mexico scores a perfect 100 out of 100 for federal dependency. It is statistically the most dependent state in America. Its economy is built on two extremely volatile pillars. Pillar 1. Massive federal defense spending. National laboratories like Los Alamos and Sandia are the primary drivers of high-income employment. Pillar 2. Oil revenue from the Permian Basin. It is essentially a government company town. The private sector in New Mexico is incredibly weak. If you don't work for the government, or the oil fields, or a hospital, there are very few high-paying jobs available. This lack of opportunity leads to a massive brain drain. Young, educated people leave New Mexico for Texas or Colorado as soon as they get their degrees. This leaves behind an aging, impoverished population that requires more and more social services. In 2026, this becomes a critical failure point. If the U.S. government faces a shutdown, or a debt ceiling crisis, or a sequestration of defense spending to manage the deficit, New Mexico's economy paralyzes instantly. Scientists stop getting paid, contractors stop working, the retail stores that serve them go bankrupt. It has no resilience, it has no backup plan. It is purely at the mercy of political winds blowing from thousands of miles away in Washington, D.C. Before we enter the top 5, I want you to pause for a second. I want you to ask yourself a hard question. Does the state you live in produce something the world actually needs, like food, energy, manufacturing, or technology? Or does it just offer something the world wants when times are good, like vacations, retirement homes, or gambling? The answer to that question might determine your financial survival in 2026. If you had to move your entire life savings out of one of these states tomorrow, which one would you run from fastest? Let me know in the comments below. Let's get back to the list. Number 5. West Virginia. The demographic cliff. West Virginia is facing a crisis that money alone cannot fix. It is facing a biological crisis. It is one of the only states in the US where deaths consistently outnumber births by a significant margin. The population is shrinking, but more importantly, the workforce is vanishing. Look at the labor force participation rate. West Virginia consistently ranks at the absolute bottom of the nation. Less than 55% of the adult population is actually working or looking for work. Think about that. Barely half the adults are productive in the formal economy. The rest are retired, disabled, or have simply given up on finding a job. The coal industry, which once built the schools and roads of this state, is a shadow of its former self, and nothing has come to replace it. So, what happens in 2026? You have a massive, aging population that requires expensive healthcare and pensions, and you have a shrinking, tiny group of young workers to pay the taxes to support them. The math simply does not work. It is a demographic death spiral. In 2026, as the baby boomers hit their 80 seconds, the strain on West Virginia's medical and social systems will break the budget. We are already seeing hospitals closing in rural areas. Ambulance services are underfunded and slow. If you retire here because the houses are cheap, you might find yourself in a dangerous situation. Good luck finding a specialist when you have a heart attack. That is the reality of a collapsing tax base. Number 4. Illinois. The $15,800 debt per person. Welcome to the king of debt. Illinois is not collapsing because of the economy. It is collapsing because of corruption and bad math. Let's talk about the unfunded pension liability. This is the money the state promised to pay government workers when they retire, but simply didn't set aside. According to the Reason Foundation and Truth in Accounting, Illinois has over $200 billion in unfunded liabilities. That number is so big it sounds abstract. So let's break it down. That equates to roughly $15,800 of debt for every single man, woman, and child in the state. Imagine being born with a $15,000 bill already attached to your name. In 2026, the bill comes due. The pension funds are running dry. To keep the checks coming to retirees, Illinois has to raise property taxes. But Illinois already has some of the highest property taxes in the nation. This creates the vicious cycle, or the death spiral. Taxes go up to pay for debt. So businesses and wealthy residents leave for Florida or Tennessee to escape the taxes. The tax base shrinks. So taxes have to go up again on the people who stayed to make up the difference. It is a state of service insolvency. You pay premium taxes for third world services. Your tax money isn't paving roads. It isn't teaching kids. It is paying for the retirement of a bureaucrat who stopped working in 2005. By 2026, Illinois will be forced to make impossible choices between defaulting on its bonds or gutting public safety. Number 3. Hawaii. The logistics nightmare. Hawaii is paradise. Nobody disputes that. But paradise has a price tag that is becoming lethal. We all know Hawaii is expensive. But the data for 2026 points to a cost of living crisis that will lead to mass displacement. Hawaii imports over 90% of its goods. Food, fuel, construction materials, medicine. It all comes on ships. And thanks to a federal law called the Jones Act, shipping to Hawaii is artificially expensive because it must be done on US-flagged ships. Here is the 2026 risk factor: global instability. If oil prices spike in 2026 due to geopolitical conflict in the Middle East, or if global supply chains fracture due to trade wars, the cost of shipping goods to Hawaii doesn't just go up a little, it skyrockets. We are predicting hyperinflation specifically for the islands. The median home price is already over $830,000. Locals, the native Hawaiians, are fleeing to Las Vegas because they literally cannot afford to eat and live on their ancestral land. In 2026, Hawaii risks becoming a feudal state, a playground for billionaires like Mark Zuckerberg and Oprah Winfrey, while the working class lives in poverty or leaves entirely. But here is the catch: without a service class, the tourism economy collapses. Hotels can't run without housekeepers. Restaurants can't run without cooks. Hawaii is pricing itself into oblivion. Number 2. Louisiana, the uninsurable state. Louisiana is facing a crisis that is existential. The land is physically sinking, and the insurance companies are running away. This is the insurance exodus. Because of the frequency of hurricanes and a terrible legal environment for lawsuits, major insurance carriers are pulling out of Louisiana entirely. For those who can find coverage, the projected premiums for 2025 to 2026 are averaging over $7,800 a year. That is 3 times the national average. Why does this cause an economic collapse? Think about the mechanics of real estate. You cannot get a mortgage from a bank without home insurance. It is a requirement. If you can't get a mortgage, you can't buy a house. If nobody can buy houses, the real estate market freezes solid. Home values plummet to zero because the asset is illiquid. In 2026, we expect to see entire coastal towns in Louisiana become ghost economies. Properties will be abandoned because the cost of insurance and property taxes exceeds the value of the shelter itself. People will simply walk away. It is not the storm that destroys the state. It is the act of paying for the storm. And Louisiana is running out of payers. Number 1. Florida, the perfect storm. And finally, the number 1 state most likely to collapse in 2026. The state where everyone moved during the pandemic. Florida. You might be shocked. Florida is booming, right? People are moving there in droves. But that is exactly why the crash will be so spectacular. Florida is currently sitting on the biggest real estate bubble in America, and a pin is coming to pop it. That pin is the insurance and inflation pincer. Let's look at the hard data from MoneyGeek and recent insurance filings. The average home insurance premium in Florida is projected to hit nearly $12,000 in some areas. That is nearly 5 times the national average. But it gets worse. After the Surfside building collapse, new safety regulations were passed. This means condo associations, HOAs, are forced to stockpile reserves for repairs. As a result, HOA fees in condos are doubling or tripling overnight. Here is the 2026 scenario. The Great Retirement Liquidation. Hundreds of thousands of retirees moved to Florida on a fixed income. They budgeted carefully. They planned for a $2,000 insurance bill and a $300 HOA fee. Suddenly, in 2026, they are facing a $12,000 insurance bill and a $1,000 monthly HOA fee. They simply cannot pay it. The math doesn't work. They have to sell. But here is the problem. Who buys? Who buys a depreciating asset with a $12,000 annual holding cost? Inventory is already skyrocketing in places like Cape Coral and Punta Gorda. Prices are beginning to crack, dropping 5% in some areas already. By 2026, this turns into a panic, a rush for the exits. But the door is jammed. Florida's economy is built almost entirely on real estate and construction. When the housing market crashes, the jobs disappear. the tax revenue disappears, and the sunshine dream turns into a financial nightmare. Florida is a state built on a bet against nature, and in 2026, nature and the actuaries are coming to collect. So, what is the common thread here? What connects the swamps of Louisiana to the deserts of Nevada? It is a lack of diversification and an addiction to easy money, whether that's federal aid, oil revenues, or a real estate bubble. If you live in one of these states, you need to take a hard look at your personal balance sheet. Are your assets tied up in local real estate? Is your job dependent on government contracts or tourism? If the answer is yes, you are exposed. You are standing on the fault line. Diversification is your only armor. Do not keep all your eggs in a basket that has a hole in the bottom. But it's not all bad news. For every state that is crumbling, there is another state that is quietly building a fortress. States with low debt, states with diverse economies that produce essential goods, states that will weather the storm of 2026 and come out stronger. I have identified 5 specific states that are the safe havens of the future. They are boring. They are unsexy, but they will make you rich while everyone else is panicking. I break them down in this video right here. The 5 safe haven states that will boom during the 2026 crash. Click here to watch it now, and I'll see you on the safe side.